She placed a bowl of stew in front of a man she had never met, a man bleeding from a cut above his eye, sitting on her porch steps in the July heat, like he had nowhere left to fall. She didn't ask his name. She just asked, "Have you eaten?" He hadn't. Not in 2 days. And something in the way she said it, not with pity, not with fear, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who understood what it meant to go without, made him unable to leave. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The summer of 1883 came hard to Carver's Bluff, Wyoming. The creek ran low, the fields cracked, and the widow woman at the edge of town kept her porch swept clean and her lamp burning every night the same way she had for the past 3 years, even though there was nobody left alive who was coming home to see it. Her name was Margaret Elaine Calhoun. Most people in Carver's Bluff called her May. A few of the older women called her that poor dear. The men on the town council called her a problem, which was their way of saying she owned land they wanted and she refused to sell it. She was 34 years old. She had dark hair she kept pinned back tight. She had hands that were rough from work and eyes that didn't apologize for anything. She had been married to Thomas Calhoun for 6 years before a fever took him in the spring of 1880, and she had been running his farm alone ever since. Not struggling, running. There was a difference, and May knew it even if nobody else in town seemed to. She grew vegetables and sold them at market. She raised 4 chickens and traded eggs for flour and salt. She repaired her own fences when they broke, which was often because the soil near the creek shifted every time the water rose and fell. She did every single bit of it without asking one person in Carver's Bluff for a thing. The town respected Thomas Calhoun when he was alive. They had complicated feelings about his wife now that he was gone. Some women brought her food in the first weeks after Thomas died, which was kind. But then they stopped coming around, which was also something. A few of the men offered to buy the farm outright at prices that were insulting, and when May said no, they stopped tipping their hats when they passed her on the street. Walter Greer, who owned the mill and 3 other properties in town, and whose opinion everyone in Carver's Bluff seemed to treat like a sermon from Scripture, said plainly at a town meeting that May Calhoun was too stubborn for her own good, and would end up losing everything anyway. May heard about it the next morning. She went to market that afternoon and sold out of tomatoes by noon. She was not a woman who needed the last word. She needed the last sale. There was a distinction there too. But even strong women got tired. And on the morning that changed everything, a Tuesday the 14th of July, hot enough to make the air shimmer above the road, May was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the work. She had woken before dawn as she always did. She had made coffee as she always did. And she had set 2 cups on the table as she still did, without thinking the way her hands had learned the habit in 6 years of marriage and had not unlearned it in 3 years of being alone. When she realized what she'd done, she stood there for a long moment looking at the second cup. Then she picked it up, poured the coffee into her own, and went out to feed the chickens. She did not cry. She hadn't cried in a long time. Crying felt like something that happened to women who still had the energy to grieve. May had converted her grief into motion a long time ago. She put it in the ground with the seeds. She carried it in buckets of water from the well. She built it into the fence posts she reset every spring. Thomas would have understood. He'd been that kind of man. It was almost noon when she heard the horse. May was in the side yard, pulling weeds from between the bean rows, when she heard the animal coming up the road slow, uneven, the wrong rhythm for a healthy horse. She stood and shielded her eyes against the sun. The horse was a big gray animal, dusty and lathered. It was walking instead of trotting, which meant it had been ridden hard and long and was nearly spent. The man on its back was sitting forward over the saddle horn in a way that told May he wasn't in much better condition. She watched him get closer. He was tall, she could tell, even hunched over like that. Big through the shoulders, dark hair under a hat that had seen better days. He wore a canvas work shirt with the sleeves rolled past the elbows, and there was a dark stain on the side of his face that she recognized from experience as dried blood from a cut he hadn't tended. He pulled the horse to a stop in front of her gate. For a moment, he just sat there. The horse stood with its head low, blowing hard. Then the man looked up and found her face, and May saw that his eyes were clear, even if the rest of him wasn't. Dark brown eyes, steady and direct, the kind of eyes that had seen enough of the world to have stopped being surprised by most of it. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low, rough around the edges. "I don't mean to trouble you. My horse needs water." May looked at the horse. Then she looked at the man. "You need water too," she said. "And something for that cut." He opened his mouth like he was going to argue. "Get down," she said. "I'll see to your horse." He got down. He did it carefully, which told her the rest of him hurt, too, not just his head. He held onto the saddle for a moment when his boots hit the ground, steadying himself, and May noted that, but didn't comment on it. She unlatched the gate and held it open. "Trough's around back," she said. "Bring her around and then come up to the porch." He nodded once. "Thank you, ma'am." She went inside and got the tin box she kept her medicines in, iodine clean cloth, a needle and thread she hoped she wouldn't need. She put the coffee pot back on the stove and added wood to the fire. She looked at the stew she'd made that morning, enough for her for 2 days, and got out a second bowl without stopping to think about it. When she came back out to the porch with the medicine box, he was already there, sitting on the top step with his hat in his hands. Without the hat, he looked younger, though not young. She put his age somewhere around 35, maybe 38. There were lines around his eyes that came from squinting into the sun for years, and a scar along his jaw that was old enough to be faded to silver. He had washed the blood off his face at the trough. She could see the cut now above his right eyebrow, deep enough to need attention, but not so deep she'd need the needle. A clean slash, like something had struck him there. A rock maybe, or the edge of something metal. She sat down 2 steps below him so she could see the cut properly and opened the medicine box. "This'll sting," she said. "Reckon it will," he said. She pressed the iodine cloth against the cut. He didn't flinch. Not a muscle in his face moved. "What's your name?" she asked. "Cole," he said. "Cole Briggs." "Where are you coming from, Cole Briggs?" A pause. "North. Had a place up in the Laramie Range, mountain country." "What happened to your face?" Another pause. This one longer. "Disagreement," he said. May looked at him over the cloth. Must have been a significant one. The other man thought so. He held her gaze. "I don't make a habit of it, ma'am, fighting. I want you to know that." "I didn't ask." "No," he said. "But you're sitting on your own porch tending a stranger's wound, and you deserve to know the kind of man you're dealing with." May sat back and considered him. Most men she had known in her life said a great deal without meaning much of it. This man said very little and seemed to mean all of it. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "I don't want to—" "Are you hungry?" He stopped. "Yes, ma'am." "Have you eaten today?" "No." "Yesterday?" His jaw tightened slightly. That was answer enough. "I have stew on the stove," May said, standing and folding the cloth. "Come inside." He looked up at her like she'd said something in a foreign language. "Ma'am, I can't just—" "You can," she said. "And you will. Your horse is tended. You're bleeding, you haven't eaten in 2 days, and I made enough stew for 4 people this morning because I always make too much." She picked up the medicine box. "That's all this is. Come inside." He came inside. He sat at her kitchen table like a man who'd forgotten what a kitchen table felt like. Careful about it, keeping his back straight, turning his hat in his hands, looking at the room the way a person looks at something they haven't seen in a long time, and aren't sure they're allowed to want. May set a bowl in front of him. Cornbread on a plate beside it, coffee in the cup she'd added wood to the fire for. He looked at it for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Thank you." "Eat before it cools," she said, sitting down across from him with her own bowl. They ate without talking for a while, the sound of the summer outside crickets beginning early, a bird somewhere in the fence row, the horse moving in the yard, came through the window. May drank her coffee and watched him eat without making it obvious she was watching. He ate like a man who'd been hungry long enough to be past the point of being ravenous, slow and deliberate. He broke the cornbread with his hands and used it to push the stew around before he lifted the spoon. He finished everything in the bowl. "More," she said. "I couldn't." "You could," she said, getting up anyway and refilling it. He didn't argue the second time. When the bowls were empty and the coffee was drunk, Cole Briggs sat at her table, looking like a man who'd been handed a problem he didn't know how to solve. "I should pay you," he said. "It was stew and cornbread." "Still." "I don't need your money, Mr. Briggs." "Cole," he said. "Cole." She folded her hands on the table. "Where are you headed?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not sure yet." "That's an honest answer." "I try." May studied him. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding. The color had come back to his face with the food. He looked like a man who could be formidable when he was well, which he wasn't quite yet. "The disagreement up north," she said carefully. "Is it the kind that's going to follow you here?" Cole looked at her directly. "It might," he said. "I won't lie to you about that." She nodded slowly. "What was it about?" He set his coffee cup down. "There's a man up in the Laramie Range, name of Holt Garver. He's been buying up land through the whole valley for 2 years, some of it legal, some of it not." He paused. "He found a way to forge signatures on land deeds, paid off a clerk in the county seat to record them. 3 families I know of have already been pushed off property they've held for 20 years. May was very still. "I had proof," Cole said. "A letter. The clerk wrote it down when he started getting nervous, wrote down what Garver paid him to do, and who he did it to. I was carrying it south to the territorial commissioner." He touched the cut above his eye without thinking about it. "Garver's men caught up with me 2 days out." "Did they get the letter?" Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and set a folded piece of paper on her kitchen table. "No," he said. May looked at the letter. Then she looked at him. "You're carrying evidence against a powerful man," she said. "And you came through my gate bleeding and half-starved." "Yes, ma'am." "And now you're sitting in my kitchen." "I am." May sat with that for a moment. Outside, the summer afternoon was building toward its hottest part of the day. A dry wind moved through the yard and made the bean plants shiver. "The territorial commissioner," she said. "He's in Cheyenne." "He is. That's 4 days south." "3 if the horse holds." May looked at the folded letter on her table. She thought about the 3 families Cole had mentioned pushed off land they'd held for 20 years. She thought about Walter Greer and his low offers, and the way the town council looked at her farm like it was already theirs. She thought about Thomas and the deed to this property that she kept in a locked box under the floorboards, because she didn't entirely trust anyone. She thought about a great many things very quickly. "Your horse needs a day," she said. Cole opened his mouth. "She's spent," May said firmly. "You push her tomorrow and you won't make Cheyenne at all. You'll be on foot with a letter and a bloody head and no horse, which will make you considerably easier to find." He closed his mouth. He knew she was right. She could see that he knew. "There's a barn," May said. "It's not large, but there's a clean stall and hay, and your horse will be rested by morning." She held his gaze. "You can sleep in there too if you've a mind to. Or I can put blankets on the porch. Up to you." "Ma'am, I don't want to put you at risk." "Mr. Briggs?" She said it quietly, but clearly. "I have been at risk every day since my husband died, and the men in this town decided my land was more valuable than my right to keep it. One more night of risk is not going to break me." Cole Briggs looked at her across her kitchen table with the afternoon light coming through the window, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity, she would have shown him the door for pity. Something more like recognition. Like a man looking at a reflection he wasn't expecting. "The barn will be fine," he said. "Thank you, Mrs." "May?" she said. "Just May." May. He stood picking up his hat. "If Garver's men come through tonight, then we'll deal with it tonight." He seemed to want to say something else. Something about how he shouldn't be here, shouldn't have stopped, shouldn't have eaten her food, and rested his horse, and placed his trouble under her roof. She could see all of it moving through his eyes. "Cole," she said. He stopped. "You asked if your horse could have water," she said. "That's all you asked for. Everything else was my choice." She nodded toward the door. "Go see to her. I'll bring out blankets before dark." He put his hat on. He looked at her one more moment. "I haven't met many women like you," he said. "You haven't met any women like me," May said. "Go on." He went. May stood in her kitchen for a long moment after the door closed. She looked at the 2 empty bowls on her table. She looked at the folded letter Cole had put back in his pocket when he left. She looked at the second coffee cup rinsed and sitting in the drying rack now because she'd cleaned up while he ate out of old habit, the way her hands knew to do. She thought about the 3 families pushed off their land. She thought about Holt Garver, a name she didn't know yet, but felt she would come to know. She thought about a mountain cowboy who carried evidence against a dangerous man and had still stopped when his horse was spent, because you didn't push a spent horse no matter what was coming behind you. She picked up the washcloth and dried her hands. Then she went to check the locks on the door's front back and the window above the dry sink, not because she was frightened, but because she was careful, and there was a considerable difference between those 2 things. Outside, she could hear Cole Briggs moving in the barn. The soft sound of his voice as he spoke to the horse. Low words, steady and calm, the way a man talks to an animal he trusts. Thomas used to talk to the horses like that. May went to fold the blankets she'd promised. By the time she brought them out to the barn, the sun was sitting low and red over the mountains to the west, and the air had cooled by just a degree or 2. That small mercy that came every evening in summer, the one that made you think you could survive one more day of the heat. Cole was sitting just inside the barn door with his back against the wall, his long legs stretched out in front of him, the gray horse standing quiet in the stall behind him. He'd taken off his shirt to wash at the trough. She could see it hanging on the stall rail drying, and was buttoning a clean one he'd pulled from his saddlebags. He stood when he saw her coming. "Blankets," she said, holding them out. "Obliged." He took them. "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to." She looked past him at the gray horse. She did. She's better than she was. Good. May turned to go. "May." She stopped. "Why'd you let me in?" he said. "You don't know me. You didn't ask for any of this." May looked at the mountains going dark to the west. She thought about the question. She thought about what Thomas would have done, which was the same thing she did, because she'd loved him in part for exactly that reason. "You asked if your horse could have water," she said again. "You didn't demand it. You didn't threaten anything. You sat on my steps and let a woman tend your wound without arguing past a certain point." She glanced back at him. "I've had men come through this gate who didn't offer me those same courtesies. They got nothing. You were different." He was quiet. "Besides," she said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite dry humor, but was close to it. "You're carrying something that needs to get to Cheyenne, and I've met Walter Greer, and I've heard men like Greer my entire life. I know what land fraud looks like from the receiving end." Cole stared at her. "Get some sleep," she said. "I'll have breakfast ready before first light. You'll want an early start." She walked back to the house. She didn't look back, but she heard him just barely over the sound of the evening wind say something that might have been, "Yes, ma'am," or might have been, "Thank you," or might have been something else entirely. She went inside and bolted the door. She looked at the kitchen. At the table where 2 people had eaten tonight for the first time in 3 years. At the lamp she would carry up to bed and set in the window the way she always did every night. The way Thomas used to say a light in the window meant someone was thinking of you. She set the lamp in the window. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time, but that she told herself was only because she was listening for trouble. That was the only reason. That was all. Down in the barn, Cole Briggs lay on his back in the clean hay with his hat over his face, and the gray horse breathing slow and even in the stall behind him, and the letter still in his shirt pocket folded against his chest, and he stared at the darkness above him, and thought about a woman who made stew for two out of habit, and didn't call it grief, and didn't ask for anything in return, and said, "That was my choice." Like she'd been making her own choices for so long, it had become the only language she trusted. He thought about the men coming behind him. He thought about the families already gone from their land. He thought about May Calhoun's hands, rough and capable, pressing iodine cloth against his face without flinching, and her voice saying, "You could," when he said he couldn't eat anymore, and the way she'd refilled the bowl anyway. He thought about the lamp burning in the upstairs window. He hadn't planned to stop. He hadn't planned any of this. But his horse was rested, and there was food in him for the first time in 2 days, and somewhere above him, a woman was lying awake for reasons that probably had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with the weight she'd been carrying alone for 3 years. And Cole Briggs, who had lived in the mountains because he'd decided a long time ago that getting close to people was a fast way to lose them, lay in the hay and felt something he hadn't felt in years and could not immediately name. Safe, maybe. Or close enough to it that the difference wasn't worth arguing about tonight. He pulled his hat down over his eyes. He slept. Cole was gone before the sun fully cleared the mountains. May knew it the moment she woke the way you know a thing before you confirm it. A certain quality of silence in the yard, an absence that had its own weight. She dressed and went downstairs and put the coffee on, and when she looked out the kitchen window, the barn door was standing open, and the gray horse was gone. He'd left the blankets folded neat on the porch rail. That was all. May stood at the window with her coffee and looked at the folded blankets for a long moment. Then she unlocked the back door and went out to close the barn. Inside the stall, the hay was smoothed down where he'd slept. The water bucket was full. He'd drawn water before he left for her, so she wouldn't have to. The horse's trough was clean. On top of the folded saddle pad he'd left on the stall rail, there was a coin. A silver dollar. Polished enough that it caught the early morning light coming through the gap in the barn wall. May picked it up. She stood there holding it for longer than made any practical sense. Then she put it in her apron pocket and went back to the house to start her day. She told herself she hoped he made Cheyenne without trouble. She told herself she hoped the letter got to the commissioner and that Holt Garver ended up in a jail cell, which was where men like that belonged. She told herself Cole Briggs was a stranger who had stopped one night and moved on the way strangers did, and that was the end of it. She almost believed herself. By mid-morning, she was at market with her vegetables the same as any Tuesday, and the town of Carver's Bluff was conducting its usual business around her. Women moved between stalls with their baskets. Children ran the spaces between the wagons. The men of consequence stood in front of the feed store, the same as always, talking in the loud, self-important way of men who believe their conversations are the most interesting thing in any given radius. Walter Greer was among them. He was a broad man, thick in the middle, with a silver watch chain stretched across his vest, and a way of standing that suggested he believed the ground under his feet was personally grateful for his presence. He was talking when May set up her table, and he was still talking when she sold her first dozen eggs, and she made a practiced effort not to look in his direction, because looking at Walter Greer before 10 in the morning tended to ruin the rest of the day. It was his voice that made her look up in the end. "I heard there was a stranger through here last night," Greer said to the men around him not quietly. "Riding a gray horse, big fella. Anybody see him?" May's hands went very still on a bundle of carrots. She did not look up. "I didn't see nobody," said Ed Tanner, who ran the livery. "My boy said he saw a horse tied at the widow Calhoun's place," said Frank Dills, who ran the hardware store, and had 3 sons, who apparently had nothing better to do than observe the coming and going at May's farm. "Did he?" Greer's voice had a particular quality to it, not surprised, not concerned. Interested in the way a man is interested in information that might be useful. May set down the carrots. She turned and looked at Walter Greer directly, which she did not often do because it tended to give him the impression that he was worth looking at. "Good morning, Walter," she said. He found her across the market square and smiled the smile that she found most objectionable about him, the indulgent one, the one that meant he thought he was being patient with her. "Morning, May. Heard you had company last night." "I had a traveler stop for water," she said. "His horse was spent. He watered up and moved on. Just water. And some supper." She held his gaze. "Is there a law against feeding a hungry man in Carver's Bluff, Walter? Because if there is, I missed that town meeting." A few people nearby had found reasons to slow their walking. Greer's smile didn't move. "No law. Just curious. What kind of man was he?" "The kind who said thank you and left in the morning," May said. "The same as any decent traveler." "Where was he headed?" "South," she said. "Just south. Let him do what he wanted with that." Greer looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he nodded once slow, like he'd learned something and was filing it away. "You ought to be careful," he said. "Woman alone letting strangers in. Town worries about you, May." "The town can direct its worry elsewhere," she said pleasantly. "I'm doing fine." She turned back to her vegetables. Her heart was going faster than she wanted it to. Not from fear exactly, from the feeling familiar and unpleasant of being watched, of being calculated, of being a piece on a board that someone else was playing. She sold out her tomatoes by 11. She packed up early and drove home and spent the afternoon doing the kind of physical work that used up thinking, pulled the rest of the bean rows hauled compost, fixed the gate latch that had been sticking since spring. By evening, she was tired in a good solid way, and she made herself a simple supper, and she set one bowl on the table, just the one. She sat down and looked at it. Then, without entirely understanding why, she got up and got a second bowl. She put it on the table across from hers. She sat down again and looked at both of them. She ate her supper. She did not fill the second bowl. But it sat there, and she let it sit there, and she didn't try to explain that to herself, because some things didn't need explaining. Some things were just true. She was washing the dishes when she heard the horse. She stopped. Set the dish down slowly. She'd heard horses on her road before, and they never made her stop like that. But something about this one, the pace of it, the direction it was coming from, made her hands go still in the dishwater. She dried her hands. She went to the window. The gray horse came up the road at a walk. Cole Briggs was on its back, sitting upright this time, not hunched. He looked like a man who'd made a decision and wasn't second-guessing it. He stopped at her gate. May went to the front door and opened it before he could knock. They looked at each other across the yard. "The road south is watched," he said. "2 men at the ridgeline crossing. Another one at the creek ford by Millhaven." His jaw was tight. "Garver moved faster than I expected." May looked at him. "How do you know?" "I went far enough to see them, turned back before they saw me." He held her gaze. "I can't go south. Not yet. Not the main road. There's a back way," May said. "Through the Hendersons' old property. Comes out east of the Millhaven Road past the creek." He looked at her. "You know it well. Thomas and I used it every spring when the main road flooded." She stepped back from the doorway. "Come inside. You're not going anywhere tonight, and you know it, so come in and let's think." He came in. He sat at her table, the same chair as the night before, like he'd already established a place there without meaning to, and she poured coffee and put the rest of the cornbread on a plate between them, and they sat across from each other in the lamplight, and May felt the specific strangeness of having the same man in her kitchen 2 nights running, which had not happened since Thomas. "Walter Greer was asking about you at market this morning," she said. Cole looked up sharply. "What?" "He heard you'd stopped here. Frank Dill's boy saw your horse." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I told him you watered your horse and moved on, headed south." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "You covered for me." I told him the truth. "You did water your horse. You did move on." She looked at him steadily. "You just came back." Something moved through his expression. Not quite a smile. Something more careful than that. "May," he said. "Greer's asking about me for a reason. If he's connected to Garver." "I don't know if he is," she said. "But I know he's been trying to buy my land for 2 years at prices that are an insult, and I know he has friends on the county council, and I know that when 3 families had their deeds disputed last year in the valley west of here, Walter Greer ended up with all 3 properties inside of 6 months." She met his eyes. "So yes, I covered for you." Cole set down his coffee. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her that morning before he left that same thing in his face that she couldn't quite categorize, that wasn't pity and wasn't admiration, but was something in between that felt more honest than either. "Those families in the valley," he said carefully, "were their names Pearson and Colby." May felt cold. "The Pearsons sold their place in September," she said. "The Colbys were gone by November. I heard they had deed problems." "Garver's deed problems," Cole said. "The same forged signatures, the same county clerk." He leaned forward. "May Carver's bluff is not outside his reach. This town is not outside his reach." She had known this, she realized. She had known it in the way you know something you've been refusing to look at directly. "The letter," she said, "names everyone. Garver, the clerk, the method, the properties. Every family." He touched his shirt pocket. "If this gets to the Commissioner, Garver's finished. His deeds are worthless. Those families might get their land back." "And if it doesn't get there?" Cole said nothing. That was answer enough. May looked at the lamp between them. The flame was steady. No draft tonight, no wind. She thought about the locked box under the floorboards with Thomas's deed in it. She thought about Walter Greer's indulgent smile and the way he said the town worries about you. May, like worry and acquisition, were the same thing. "The Henderson back road," she said. "I can draw it for you. Landmarks, water points, where to avoid the open ridgelines. You'd need to leave before first light and go slow until you're past the Millhaven Road. You'd do that. I'm already doing it." She got up and went to the shelf where she kept Thomas's old survey papers. "You'll need to know about the creek crossing at the Henderson property line. It's shallower than it looks, but there's soft ground on the far bank. Your horse needs to come at it from the north side." Cole stood too. Coming around the table, and for a moment they stood close together over the papers she spread out on the table, closer than they'd been close enough that she was aware of the specific reality of another person in her space, after a long time of there being no one, and he smelled like horses and wood smoke, and the clean cold of high country air, and May focused on the survey paper and traced the route with her finger. "Here," she said. "The Henderson house is a ruin. Don't stop there, the well's gone bad. Keep going east another quarter mile, and you'll hit a spring in the rocks. Good water. Rest your horse there." She traced further. "This ridge here, stay below it. You go over the top and you're visible from the Millhaven Road." Cole was bent over the paper beside her, following her finger with his eyes. "And here, this creek bend. That's on the far end of my property, actually," she said. Thomas ran a fence along the south bank. Part of it's still standing. The gate in the fence, there's a red cloth tied to the post. Thomas put it there so we'd know which gate in the dark. Cole looked at her. "He sounds like he was a careful man," he said quietly. May looked down at the map. "He was," she said. "He thought of things like that, small things that mattered later." The lamp flame moved a breath of air from somewhere, the house settling, and the shadow on the map shifted for just a moment. "How long has he been gone?" Cole asked. It wasn't a pushy question. He asked it the way he said everything low direct, like he meant it and nothing extra. 3 years in April, May said. "I'm sorry. Thank you." She straightened up, putting a little space between them, going back to herself. "I'll fold this up for you. Take the survey, it's better than my memory in the dark." "May." His voice stopped her. She looked at him. "I need you to know," he said. "If Greer is connected to Garver and I think he might be given what you just told me about those valley properties, then asking about me at market this morning wasn't just curiosity. He's looking for the letter." "I know. That means he might come here." "I know that too." And I'm bringing that to your door, again. He held her gaze. I keep doing that, and I don't know how to. You didn't bring it to my door, May said. It was already here. I just didn't have a name for it yet. She held the folded survey paper out to him. Walter Greer has been a problem in this county for a long time. You just happen to be the first person I've met who's carrying something that could solve him. Cole took the paper from her. His hand closed around it, and also just briefly around her fingers, and May did not pull away. She didn't know exactly why. Maybe because it had been 3 years since anyone had held on even for a moment. Maybe because the lamp was burning between them, and his eyes were steady and dark, and she was tired of carrying everything alone, and it was just a moment, just a second. She stepped back. Breakfast before first light. She said, her voice entirely even. Get some sleep. He looked at her for one more beat. Then he put the survey paper in his pocket with the letter and picked up his hat and went back to the barn. May blew out the lamp on the table and carried the kitchen lamp to the window. She stood there for a long moment looking at the barn. Then she went to bed. Sometime, well before dawn, she heard them. Horses on the road. More than one moving without lights. Which was itself a thing that woke her faster than any sound, because people with innocent purposes didn't ride dark roads without lamps at 3 in the morning. She was out of bed before she was fully awake, her feet finding the floor, her hands finding the boots she left by the bed. She dressed in 30 seconds the way you learn to dress, when you've lived alone long enough to know that emergencies don't wait for you to be ready. She went to the window. 3 horses on the road, stopping at her gate. Her chest went cold and tight. She moved fast down the stairs to the kitchen to the back door. She unlatched it silently and went out into the dark yard and across to the barn. She opened the barn door just wide enough to slip through and found Cole already awake, already standing, already had his boots on. I heard them, he said. 3 riders, stopped at the gate. How long to the Henderson Road from here? 10 minutes on horseback, but they'll hear you leave. He was already moving to saddle the gray horse fast and quiet. Then I need you to give me those 10 minutes. May stared at him. How? Go to your front door, he said. Open it. Talk to them. Make it take 10 minutes. Cole, May. He stopped. He turned and looked at her in the dark of the barn, and his voice was low and very serious. Do not open that door unless there's a lamp burning in the window behind you. If you're not in front of a light, they can't see your face clearly. You hold all the advantage. She looked at him. And if they force their way in, they won't, he said. Not with the whole town able to hear it. They want quiet. They want me, and they want quiet, and they'll keep this a conversation as long as they think they might get what they want from one. He held her gaze. 10 minutes, that's all I need. May nodded once. She went. She crossed the dark yard back to the house. She went to the kitchen and lit the lamp on the table and carried it to the front window, the same as always, the same as every night. She opened the front door and stood in the doorway with the light behind her. One of the 3 men at the gate called out, "Evening, ma'am. Sorry to disturb you." He was polite. That was the most frightening thing about him, how polite he was. "It's 3 in the morning," May said. "You'll have to forgive me for finding the timing unusual." "Yes, ma'am. We're looking for a man. Big fella, dark hair, riding a gray horse. We believe he stopped here yesterday." "A traveler did stop here yesterday," May said. "Watered his horse. Had some supper. Left this morning." "Yes, ma'am. Did he say where he was headed?" "South," May said. Which was still true. It was always true. Cole intended to go south. "Did he leave anything behind?" May let a beat pass. "Like what?" "A letter, maybe. Papers of some kind." May looked at the man. He was sitting his horse, easy, relaxed, the way a man sits when he's very confident about how things are going to go. "He didn't leave anything," she said. "He left a silver dollar, which I assumed was payment for the meal. That's all." "You sure about that, ma'am?" "I'm sure about everything I say," May said. "I'm a widow woman, not a fool." The polite one was quiet for a moment. She could feel him deciding something. "Mind if we look around?" he said. "I do mind, actually," May said. "It's 3 in the morning. I live alone. And unless you have a paper from the sheriff's office authorizing a search, I'd appreciate it if you and your friends moved on." "We don't want any trouble." "Then you're in luck," May said pleasantly. "Because neither do I. Good night, gentlemen." She stepped back and closed the door. She did not bolt it immediately. That would make too much sound, would tell them too much. She stood behind it with her hand flat on the wood and her heart going very fast, and counted in her head. 1, 2, 3. She heard them talking quietly outside. Low voices. Not angry. Considering. 30, 31, 32. She heard one of the horses move. 58, 59, 60. 2 minutes. She needed 8 more. She made herself move to the kitchen, deliberately audibly. Her boots on the floorboards, a cup lifted, and set down the sound of a normal woman who had answered the door and was now going back to her interrupted sleep. She made the sounds of a house settling back into its nighttime rhythms. She listened through all of it. At 6 minutes, she heard the horses move in earnest. At 7 minutes, the hoofbeats were going south down the road, the way she'd told them twice that Cole was headed, and May let out a breath that she'd been holding so long it made her ribs ache. She waited another full minute. Then she went back to the barn. It was empty. The stall was empty, the hay undisturbed, the horse and the man and all evidence of both entirely gone. May stood in the empty barn in the dark. She stayed there for a long time, long enough that the dark began to thin at the east-facing gap in the boards, long enough that the first bird started, long enough for the night to tip its way towards something else. She found the second coin on the stall rail, where the first one had been, another silver dollar. But this one had something scratched on it rough, like it had been done with the tip of a knife in a hurry. She took it to where the light was better, turned it, a single letter. M. May stood holding that coin for a long moment. Then she tucked it into her apron pocket beside the first one, and she went back to the house, and she put the coffee on, and she stood at the kitchen window and watched the sun come up over the mountains, the way she had watched it every morning for 3 years. Something had changed, though she could not have said exactly what. The letter was on its way to Cheyenne. The men with polite voices and dark purposes had gone south looking for something they weren't going to find. And somewhere on a back road that Thomas had marked with a red cloth on a fence post, a mountain cowboy was riding east in the early morning light with a letter in his pocket that had her name scratched on a coin in his saddlebag. And May Calhoun was standing in her kitchen feeling for the first time in 3 years that something was in motion in the world that she was a part of. Not a bystander, a part of. She poured her coffee. She sat at the table. She looked at the chair across from hers. She did not put a second bowl out. She did not fill a second cup. But she looked at that chair for a long time, and she let herself look, and she did not look away. And when someone knocked on her front door at 7:30 in the morning, not her gate, her door, a hard knock like a man who meant it. May stood up fast with her coffee still in her hand and felt her heart drop straight to the floor. She set the cup down. She went to the door. She opened it. Cole Briggs stood on her porch, road dust on his jacket, the gray horse tied at her gate, his eyes clear and direct and carrying something complicated in them. "I got to the Henderson Spring," he said. "I stopped to water the horse." He paused. "And I sat there for a while." May looked at him. "The roads watched past Millhaven," he said. "But that's not why I came back." "Then why?" He held her gaze. "Because you stood at your door at 3 in the morning and faced down 3 of Garver's men," he said, "to give me 10 minutes. And I rode away and left you there, and I made it almost to the Henderson Spring before I understood that I couldn't do that." His jaw was tight. "I couldn't ride off and leave you facing whatever comes next alone. I can't do it, May." May stood very still. "The letter," she said, "still needs to get to Cheyenne, I know." He looked at her. "But not today. Not until I know those men didn't come back here. Not until I know you're—" "I'm fine," she said automatically. I know you're fine, he said. I know that. That's not what I... He stopped, looked away briefly, looked back. You matter. All right. That's what I'm saying. You matter, and I'm not riding south while Garver's men are between here and there, and you're standing alone in a house with one lock on the door. The morning was warm and getting warmer. A mockingbird had started up somewhere in the fence row. May could hear her chickens in the side yard beginning their daily complaints. She looked at Cole Briggs on her porch, at the horse at her gate, at the road behind him, quiet and dust-colored in the early light. She thought about Walter Greer asking his careful questions at the market, about polite men on dark horses at 3 a.m, about a letter that could bring down a man who'd already taken 5 families' land and probably had plans for more. She thought about Thomas and what Thomas would have done. She stepped back from the door. I made too much coffee again, she said. Come in. He came in. He sat at her table, his chair. It was starting to feel like his chair, which was a thought she set aside for later examination, and she poured his coffee and sat across from him, and they looked at each other across the table in the morning light, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Cole said, I should tell you about Garver, all of it, not just the letter. All right, May said. Because you're in this now, he said, and you deserve to know what you're in. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Tell me. And he did. He told her about the Laramie Range, the mountain country he'd lived in for 6 years, running horses, keeping mostly to himself, the way he'd always preferred. He told her about the Pearson family and their 140 acres of valley grazing land, and how they'd come to him one evening because they'd heard he was a man who could be trusted, and they'd shown him the papers they'd received claiming their deed was invalid. He told her about recognizing the forgery. He'd seen enough real land documents to know what wrong looked like, and tracking it back to the county clerk's office, and the 3 weeks he'd spent building a quiet case, while Garver's men watched the Rhodes and the Pearsons, and the Colbys, and one other family he hadn't named yet, lost their land one deed challenge at a time. He told her about the county clerk, a young man named Silas Webb, not a bad man, a scared man who'd taken Garver's money because he had a sick wife and no other options, and who'd written everything down when the fear of what he'd done started weighing heavier than the fear of what Garver might do to him. He told her about the night someone searched his mountain cabin. He told her about the 2 weeks he'd spent moving through the back country with the letter heading south before Garver's men cut off the main routes. And then he stopped. May sat with all of it. The family you didn't name, she said. Cole looked at her. The third family, she said. You said 3 families. You named the Pearsons and the Colbys. He was quiet for a moment. The Marchetti family. They had 60 acres of bottomland with good water. It was the first property Garver took. Were they? They were Italian immigrants, Cole said. In the valley 8 years. Cleared the land themselves. He looked at his coffee. The men who delivered the deed challenge told them they didn't have the right to own land in Wyoming territory. Used other words too. Words I won't repeat in your kitchen. May felt something very old and very cold settle in her chest. Where are they now? I don't know, Cole said. That's the truth. I tried to find them before I left. Couldn't. He looked at her. That's another reason this letter has to get to Cheyenne. Not just the Pearsons and the Colbys. The Marchettis deserve to have it on record what was done to them. May set down her cup. She looked at Cole Briggs, this mountain cowboy who had stopped because his horse was spent, who had eaten her stew and thanked her, and left a silver dollar and come back twice now, and told her the truth both times, and she made a decision. There's another way to Cheyenne, she said. It's longer. 2 extra days, maybe 3. But it doesn't use the main roads at all. Goes through the back country east of the Millhaven Road, comes out at the Territorial Road south of the county line. Cole looked at her. You know this route. I know part of it. Ed Harlan out at the Broken Bow Ranch knows the rest. He's been running cattle on backcountry trails for 30 years. She met his eyes. He doesn't like Walter Greer. I'd trust him with this. You'd trust him with my life. She held his gaze. I'd trust him with mine. Cole looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was full in the kitchen, now warm and direct, and May was aware of how quiet the house was, just the two of them, and the sound of the world outside, and the particular weight of a decision sitting between them on the table. "How far to Broken Bow?" he said. 4 miles east, she said. "We could be back by noon." He said. "I know the way," she said, "and Ed Harlan will be more likely to help if I'm there asking." Cole looked at her. "May," he said. "Don't," she said quietly. He stopped. "Don't tell me to stay behind," she said. "Don't tell me it's not safe. Don't tell me it's your problem and not mine." Her voice was steady. "Those men were on my road at 3 in the morning. Walter Greer was asking about you in my town. The Marchettis lost their land, and nobody did anything. And I know what that feels like because I've sat across from Walter Greer and his polite smile, and felt what it means when someone looks at what you've built and sees only what they want to take." She looked at him. "This is my problem too. It has been for 2 years. I just didn't have a name for it yet." The mockingbird was still going in the fence row. Cole was very still. Then he said, "Can you be ready in 20 minutes?" "I've been ready," May said, "since before you knocked on my door." Ed Harlan opened his door with a rifle in one hand and a coffee cup in the other, which May had come to understand was simply how Ed Harlan greeted the morning. He was 70 years old and built like a fence post that had survived 30 winters, lean and weathered, and completely immovable. He had known Thomas Calhoun since before May came into the picture, and he had attended the funeral with his hat in his hands and said nothing, which was the most respectful thing anyone did that day, because everyone else said too much. He looked at May. He looked at Cole. He looked at the gray horse. He looked back at May. "You'd better come in," he said. His kitchen smelled like coffee and leather oil, and the particular kind of wood smoke that comes from a fire that's been burning in the same stove for 30 years. He sat them both down and poured without asking, and stood at his own counter and listened while Cole laid it out, all of it. Garver and the forged deeds and the county clerk and the letter and the 3 men on the dark road outside May's gate at 3 in the morning. Ed didn't interrupt once. When Cole finished, Ed set his cup down and looked at May. "You knew about the Valley families," he said. "Not about the forgeries," she said. "I knew they lost their land. I didn't know why." "I knew why," Ed said. His voice was flat and very quiet, which on Ed Harlan meant something considerably more intense than a loud man shouting. "I didn't have proof. I had suspicions and a dead end and Walter Greer smiling at me across the street." He looked at Cole. "You have proof. In my pocket," Cole said. Ed was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Silas Webb, the county clerk. You know him?" "I know his father-in-law." "Good man. Silas married his daughter 5 years back." Ed looked at his coffee. "The wife's been sick 2 years. I heard they were in debt." He shook his head once slow. "Garver finds the weak spots. That's what he does." "Silas wrote it all down," Cole said. "It's in the letter. Names, dates, amounts, paid, properties affected. Everything the commissioner needs." Ed looked at him for a long moment with the particular focused attention of a man who has spent 70 years deciding quickly who he could trust and had rarely been wrong about it. "The back route to the territorial road," he said. "I know it. Been running cattle on it since before there was a road." "May said you might." May was right. Ed pushed off the counter. "I can't ride it with you. My hip's been bad since April, and I won't make it 2 days in the saddle." He went to the shelf above the fireplace and came back with a folded piece of paper that was older than anything else in the room, creased and recreased along the same lines for years. "But I can give you this." He spread it on the table. It was a hand-drawn map, not a survey, something more personal, marked with landmarks that wouldn't appear on any official document. Rock formations, dry creek beds, a stand of trees that had been there long enough to earn a name. Ed's handwriting was small and precise and covered every margin. "You'll follow this ridge east," Ed said, putting his finger on the paper. "Don't cross it until you hit the double rock formation. You'll know it looks like 2 fists side by side. Cross there and drop down into the draw. There's water in the draw year-round, even in July. He traced the route. Follow the draw south for most of a day. It comes out at a place called Harlan's Crossing, which I named for myself because I found it and nobody else was using it. May almost smiled despite herself. From Harlan's Crossing, Ed continued, you're 3 hours east of the Millhaven Road, and you pick up the Territorial Road without going near anything Garver's men are watching. He straightened up. 2 days, maybe 2.5. You camp once, probably twice. Cole studied the map. Is the draw wide enough to avoid being skylined? You're not visible from any road in the valley for the entire route, Ed said. I used it to move cattle. I didn't want counted by certain men for 30 years. It works. Cole looked up at him. I don't know how to thank you. Get to Cheyenne, Ed said simply. That's how. May was studying the map too, the route the landmarks the distance. She was doing the math that Cole hadn't done yet, and she suspected he hadn't done it yet because he wasn't thinking about the part she was thinking about. She looked up at Ed. Ed looked back at her with the specific expression of a man who already knew what she was thinking. You'd be 3 days out and 3 days back, he said to her quietly. On backcountry, you don't know past Harlan's Crossing. I know, she said. Your place would be unattended. I know that too. Greer will take that as an opportunity, Ed said. Not cruelly, just plainly because it was true. Then we need to make sure he doesn't get one, May said. She looked at Ed. Is Ruth Tanner still staying with her sister on the East Road? Ed's eyebrows went up slightly. She is. Would she stay at my place 3 days, maybe 4? Ruth's not afraid of Walter Greer, and she's a better shot than her husband, which is saying something. Ed looked at her for a moment. Then something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed his weathered face. I'll ride over and ask her this morning. Cole had been listening to this exchange with an expression that May recognized as a man recalibrating his understanding of a situation. You're coming, he said. Past Harlan's Crossing. You don't know the territory, May said. Ed's map will get you to the crossing, but after that you're 2 days in country you've never seen with men looking for you, and a letter that needs to arrive intact and be delivered to the right hands. She met his eyes. I've been to Cheyenne twice. I know who the commissioner is. I know his clerk, as a matter of fact. Thomas did survey work for the territorial office the year before he died. She paused. So yes, I'm coming. Cole looked at Ed. Ed picked up his coffee. Don't look at me, he said. I stopped arguing with May Calhoun 3 years ago. It's a waste of everybody's time. They left Broken Bow an hour later, May on Thomas's brown mare that she'd saddled in 25 years of practice and could do in the dark coal on the gray horse that had rested enough to have some of her ease back. May had a saddlebag with 3 days of food, a blanket, and the locked tin box with Thomas's deed inside it, because she was not leaving that in the house. Cole noticed the tin box. He didn't ask about it. That was one of the things she was starting to catalog about him, without meaning to the things he noticed, and chose not to question the space he left around things that were hers. They reached Ed's double rock formation by mid-morning and crossed the ridge and dropped into the draw, and the world on the other side of that ridge was quieter and cooler and completely empty in every direction, which was both a relief and its own particular kind of pressure. Out here there was no town, no market, no Walter Greer. There was also no help. They moved at a steady pace without pushing the horses. For a long time they didn't talk much, which suited them both. May had always been comfortable with silence. Thomas had been a quiet man too, and they'd spent whole days working side by side without needing to fill the air. Cole moved through silence the same way, easy in it, not performing it, not using it to shut her out. It was different from being alone. She was noticing that more than she wanted to. It was Cole who broke the quiet mid-afternoon when they stopped to water the horses at a spring in the rocks exactly where Ed's map said it would be. Tell me about Thomas, he said. May looked at him. You don't have to, he said. He stopped, looked at the water coming out of the rock, steady and cold. I keep seeing him in things. The red cloth on the fence post, the survey map, the way you know every back road and every person who can be trusted. He looked at her. He built things that lasted. May was quiet for a moment. He was a surveyor, she said. He walked more of this territory than almost anyone. He knew land the way some men know horses by feel, by what it was telling him underneath the surface. She looked at the spring. He said water always finds its way. Said that about a lot of things, actually. Not just water. He sounds like a man worth knowing. He was the best man I ever knew, May said simply. That's the truth of it. Not perfect. He was stubborn about some things, wrong about others, and he never could learn to cook worth a damn. Something in her voice shifted slightly, not quite humor, but close to it, the kind that lives right next to grief. But he was good. He was genuinely good. And I've met enough men in my life to know how rare that is. Cole was quiet. Is that why you stayed? He asked. After, why you didn't sell and move on? Partly. She looked at the brown mare drinking beside the gray. And partly because it was ours, what we built together, and selling it felt like... She stopped, thought about it honestly. Like letting them write the ending, Greer and men like him, letting them decide what my life was worth and when it was over. She looked at Cole. I'm not ready for anyone else to write that. He held her gaze. Nobody should write it but you, he said. They didn't stop moving until the light began to fail, and they made camp in the draw, where the walls were high enough to block the wind, and there was enough dead wood from the dry season to keep a small fire. May cooked on it. Nothing complicated, just the dried beef and hardtack, and the last of the cornbread she'd packed, but hot, which mattered in the way that simple things matter when you're tired. Cole unsaddled both horses, and checked their feet, and rubbed them down with the cloth from his saddlebag. He did it without being asked, which May noticed, and he did it well, which she also noticed, and when he came to the fire and sat down across from her, they ate together in the quiet way they were already building between them without naming it. You rode the circuit as a competitor, May said when the food was done and the fire was lower. Before the mountains. He looked at her. Ed tell you that... Ed mentioned you had a reputation, she said. I'm asking about the rest of it. Cole looked at the fire. 7 years, he said. All over the territory and into Colorado and Kansas. Horses mostly. Some steer work. He paused. I was good at it. What stopped you? A long pause this time. My brother, he said. Younger brother. He followed me onto the circuit when he was 19. He wasn't... Cole stopped, started again. He was good with horses, too. Better than me maybe in the natural sense. But he took risks I wouldn't take. Showed off in ways I knew better than. He looked at his hands. There was a horse in Laramie. Everybody told him not to ride that horse. The horse had already put 2 men in the ground. His voice was very level. Daniel rode it anyway. May was still. He lived, Cole said. But his leg never healed right. He walks with a cane now. Can't ride for any length of time. He looked up. He married a good woman. Has 3 kids. He's happy, I think. Genuinely happy. He was quiet for a moment. But I stood there and watched it happen, and I didn't stop it, and I never... He stopped. You never stopped being the one who didn't stop it, May said. He looked at her. Yes, he said. So you went to the mountains. The mountains don't need saving from themselves, he said. May looked at him for a long moment. Cole, you couldn't have stopped your brother from making his own choice. No. You know that. I know it, he said. Knowing it and feeling it aren't the same country. She had no argument for that, because it was the truest thing she'd heard in years. She thought about Thomas and the fever that took him in 4 days, and how she'd known in some part of herself that people could be taken fast and without warning, and yet had never truly incorporated that knowledge into the place where she lived. And so when it happened, it was still a complete surprise, which was one of the more specific cruelties of loss. No, she said quietly. They're not. The fire crackled. The horses shifted in the dark. Above them the sky was enormous and entirely full of stars. The way it only was in back country, with no town light for miles. And May lay on her side, looking at it, and thought about how long she had been out here, and how strange it was to be out here with someone. Not bad strange, just strange, the way new things were strange. The way her own kitchen had felt strange when Cole Briggs sat in it the first time, and then less strange the second time, and now she wasn't sure she could picture her kitchen without that chair occupied. That thought woke something in her chest that she immediately moved away from. She slept. She woke before dawn to the sound of Cole's voice, low and urgent, right beside her. "May, get up." She was upright before he finished the sentence. "What? Horses," he said. "East Ridge, coming down." She heard them, then 2 horses, maybe 3, moving faster than the terrain warranted in the dark, which meant they knew the terrain, or didn't care about the terrain, and neither option was good. "How did they—" she started. "The map," Cole said. "Ed's map. If Greer knew about Ed Harlan, if he had someone watching Broken Bow, he was already moving to the horses, untying them fast and quiet. "We need to go. Now. Leave the fire." May grabbed the saddlebag and the tin box, and she had Thomas's mare saddled in under 2 minutes, her hands doing it by feel in the dark muscle memory, carrying her through what her eyes couldn't confirm. Cole put her up first, and then mounted the gray, and they moved, not south, not back north, but east, along the draw wall, where the shadow was deepest. Behind them, the fire was still burning small and orange in the dark, and May looked back at it once their camp, their supper fire, the place they'd sat and told each other the true things, and then the draw curved, and it was gone. They moved in silence for what felt like a very long time. The horses picked their way carefully, and May let Thomas's mare find her own footing, trusting the animal's night sense over her own. Cole was just ahead close enough that she could see the shape of him in the dark. Then his hand came up. "Stop." She stopped. He was listening. May listened too. Nothing. No horses, no movement. They sat in the dark for a full minute without breathing. "They stopped at the camp," Cole said quietly, "checking the fire, which means they know we were there but not where we went." "They'll split up," he said. "North and south. They don't know about east." He looked at her. "We're going to have to move faster than I wanted to in the dark." "I know." "The horses." "They're all right," May said. "Let's go." They came out of the draw at Harlan's Crossing, with the first gray light showing in the east, and May recognized the landmark from Thomas's stories, even though she'd never stood here herself. A wide, flat place where the creek spread shallow over smooth rock, easy crossing in any season. And on the far bank, the country opened up and went south toward the territorial road. Cole stopped the gray at the crossing. He turned and looked at May. She was dusty and tired, and her hair had come half out of its pins, and she didn't care about any of that. "South," he said. "From here, it's your country." She looked at the crossing, at the open country beyond, at the 2 days between here and Cheyenne, and everything that was riding on getting there. "Cross here," she said. "Stay on the low ground east of that ridge line. There's a trading post about 4 hours south. Man named Calloway runs it. Thomas used it for resupply when he was out on survey." She looked at Cole. "We'll push straight through if the horses hold. I'd rather be in Cheyenne by tomorrow evening than camp again." Cole nodded. "Agreed." They crossed the creek, and the water came up to the horses' knees and was cold, even in July, snowmelt still working its way down from the high country, and on the far bank, they picked up the pace and went south at a ground-eating trot, and the morning came up around them fast and full and bright. It was 3 hours to Calloway's, not 4, because the terrain was better than May remembered, and the horses were willing. But it was what happened at Calloway's trading post that stopped everything. There was a man there, not Garver's men. Not a threat, at least not the kind May had been braced for since 3 in the morning 2 nights ago. He was an older man sitting on the trading post steps with a cup of coffee and the specific exhaustion of someone who had been traveling for days. He wore a coat that had once been good quality and was now worn at the elbows and cuffs. He looked up when they rode in, and May saw immediately that his eyes were red from crying that had stopped a while ago and left the marks. He looked at Cole. He stood up slowly. Cole pulled the gray to a stop. The man said, "Cole Briggs." It was not a question. Cole was very still. "Silas," he said. "The county clerk. Silas Webb." May looked between them. Silas Webb looked like a man who had been taken apart and put back together in the wrong order. He was maybe 30 years old and looked 50. He had no horse that May could see. She looked and didn't find one. He had the coat and the cup of coffee and nothing else that she could identify. "How did you—" Cole started. "I ran," Silas said. "2 days ago. Garver found out about the letter. He found out about me." His voice was very flat. "He came to the county office himself. He didn't threaten. He just looked at me and said he'd heard I was having doubts and that men with doubts sometimes had accidents." He swallowed. "My wife is at her mother's in Laramie. I sent her a week ago when I started thinking this might go wrong. I stayed to—" He stopped. "I thought if I stayed I could manage it, keep things quiet until the letter got through. But it didn't stay quiet," Cole said. "No." Silas looked at the ground. "I left everything. My office, my position, everything. I've been on foot since yesterday morning. I thought Calloway knew my father. I thought he'd let me rest here and—" He looked up at Cole. "Is the letter still—" Cole reached into his shirt pocket and held up the folded paper. Silas Webb closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet, which he made no effort to address. "I wrote down everything," he said. "Every name, every amount, every date and property. I wrote down what he said to me the first time he came to my office, the exact words. I wrote down the date my wife went to the doctor and the date Garver's man came to the office the first time with an offer." His voice was shaking now, just at the edges. "I wrote it all down because I knew if it ever came apart, I needed someone to know what actually happened, what I did and why I did it and what it cost." He looked at Cole. "I need to know it wasn't for nothing." Cole got down from the gray. He walked over to Silas Webb and put his hand on the man's shoulder. "It wasn't for nothing," he said. "It's going to Cheyenne today, to the commissioner's office, in your handwriting with your name on it." He held Silas's gaze. "It's going to mean something." Silas nodded. He pressed his lips together and nodded and looked away. May stayed on her horse and felt the weight of what she was witnessing. This scared, ruined, decent man, who had done a wrong thing for real reasons, and then tried to undo it at the cost of everything. And she understood it better than she wished she did, because she understood what it meant to try to hold on to something in the face of people who wanted to take it. Cole turned back to her. "He can ride with us," May said. It wasn't a question. "On what?" Cole said. "He has no horse." May dismounted. She looked at Thomas's brown mare. She looked at Silas Webb, who was approximately Thomas's height and build, though that was the only resemblance, and she knew it. She took the mare's reins and held them out to Silas. Cole said, "May." "I'll ride with you," she said to Cole. "The gray can carry double for a day on flat ground." She looked at Silas. "Can you ride?" "Yes," he said. "Then get on," she said. "We're not stopping until Cheyenne." Silas looked at the mare. He looked at May. He opened his mouth and she could see he was about to say something that was going to take too long. "Don't thank me," she said. "Get on the horse." He got on the horse. Cole was looking at her with that expression again, the one she was running out of ways not to name. She turned to the gray before she could examine it. "Help me up," she said. He cupped his hands for her boot, and she swung up behind him and settled on the gray's back, with her hands finding a place on his sides to balance, and the horse adjusted to the weight with the steadiness of a good animal, and they went south. It was the closest she'd been to another person in 3 years. She was aware of every inch of it. She kept her back straight and her hands at his sides, and she looked at the country going by, and she did not let herself lean into him, because leaning into something was how you started depending on it. And she'd spent 3 years building a life that didn't depend on anything she couldn't control. But the country went by, and the morning got warmer, and the horses moved at a good pace, and Cole's back was solid in front of her. And after a while, not quickly, not with any decision made, she felt herself settle. Not lean, just settle. The distance between her spine and his shortened by maybe an inch. Neither of them mentioned it. Behind them, Silas Webb rode Thomas's brown mare and kept up without complaint, and said very little, which was the right call, and the territorial road appeared on the south horizon around noon, exactly where May said it would be. 5 hours to Cheyenne from this junction, May said. Cole glanced back at her over his shoulder. Then we'll be there by dark, he said. Yes, she said. His eyes stayed on her face for a moment before he turned back to the road. She cataloged that too, and moved it to the place where she was keeping all the other things she hadn't named yet, the collection that was getting too large to keep pretending didn't exist. 5 hours. She could hold herself together for 5 more hours. The territorial road stretched south ahead of them, open and clear and empty in both directions, and the sun was directly overhead and hot on May's shoulders. And somewhere behind all of them was Walter Greer, and somewhere ahead was a commissioner's office and a clerk May had met once over a land survey, and a future she could not yet see clearly. But the road was open. That was enough for now. That had to be enough. They rode into Cheyenne as the last light was leaving the sky. The three of them dusty and tired and quieter than they'd been all day, the way people get quiet when something they've been moving toward for a long time is finally close enough to touch. May knew Cheyenne well enough to navigate it without asking. She'd been twice with Thomas, and once alone the year after he died when she'd gone to file the deed transfer into her name only, and had sat across from a man at the territorial office who'd looked at her like she might need help understanding the paperwork, and she'd taken the pen from his hand and signed her name in a script so clean and deliberate that he'd had nothing to say. She directed them to a boarding house on the south end of town, run by a woman named Mrs. Aldgate, who charged fair prices and asked no unnecessary questions, which were the two qualities May valued most in temporary accommodations. Mrs. Aldgate looked at the three of them road-worn mismatched arriving at dusk, with no luggage to speak of, and simply asked how many rooms and for how many nights. 2 rooms, May said. 2 nights, possibly 3. Supper's at 7, Mrs. Aldgate said. Don't be late. They weren't late. They ate in relative silence at a long table with 4 other boarders who showed no interest in them, which was exactly right. Silas Webb ate like a man who'd forgotten food existed and was being reminded. Cole ate steadily and methodically, and once, when May reached across the table for the bread, and her hand was shaking slightly from fatigue, he moved the bread plate closer to her without commenting on the shake. She ate the bread and did not say anything about the gesture because naming it felt like it would diminish it somehow. After supper, she went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands and thought about what tomorrow required. The territorial commissioner's office opened at 8 in the morning. She knew the clerk, a man named Harold Ferris, who had worked with Thomas on 3 separate survey contracts and who owed Thomas a debt of professional gratitude that he'd expressed when Thomas died as a handwritten note that May still had in the locked tin box beside Thomas's deed. She was counting on Harold Ferris. She was counting on a 3-year-old note and a dead man's good reputation and a letter in Cole Briggs's pocket, and she was doing it in a strange city with road dust in her hair, and a mountain cowboy in the room across the hall, who had become somewhere on the back roads between Carver's Bluff and here's something she did not yet have a word for. She lay back on the bed without undressing. She was asleep in under a minute. She dreamed about Thomas's red cloth on the fence post. It was blowing in a wind she couldn't feel. Cole knocked on her door at 6:30. She was already awake. "Ferris," she said when she opened the door. "Harold Ferris is the clerk we need. He's been with the commissioner's office 11 years. He knew Thomas." Cole looked at her. He'd washed and his hair was still damp at the ends, and he'd found a clean shirt from somewhere, and he looked like what he was. A solid, capable, serious man who had slept 4 hours and was ready to finish what he'd started. "You lead," he said. "Yes," she said. "I will." They left Silas at the boarding house with instructions to stay inside and eat breakfast twice if he needed to, because Silas Webb looked like a man who was one strong wind from coming apart, and the best thing for him right now was food and walls and no new complications. The commissioner's office was a square solid building 2 blocks from the main street, and it opened at exactly 8 o'clock because territorial government operated on schedule, if nothing else. May and Cole were on the steps at 7:50. By 8:05, they were inside, and by 8:10, May was shaking Harold Ferris's hand across a counter that smelled like ink and old paper. Harold Ferris was a small, precise man with steel-rimmed glasses and an attention to detail that Thomas had always praised. He looked at May and took a moment to place her, and then recognition moved across his face. "Mrs. Calhoun," he said. "Thomas's wife." "His widow," she said. "Harold, I need to see Commissioner Aldrich, today, this morning." Harold looked at Cole. "This is Cole Briggs," May said. "He's been traveling with evidence that needs to reach the commissioner directly. It involves land fraud operating in at least 2 counties, and I believe it's been going on long enough that the commissioner will want to hear it before another day passes." Harold looked back at May. He was measuring something, the urgency in her face against the protocol in his training, the weight of her name against the weight of the request. "The commissioner has meetings this morning," he said. "Cancel one," May said. Harold blinked. "Harold." She put both hands on the counter and leaned forward slightly. "Thomas told me once that you were the most thorough man he'd ever worked with, that you never let procedure get in the way of what was right. He said that like it was the best compliment he could give." She held his gaze. "I'm asking you to be that man right now." Harold Ferris looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and went through the door behind him without another word. Cole stood beside May and said nothing. She could feel the tension in him, controlled, contained the same way he did everything but present. He'd carried this letter through 2 days of backcountry and 3 of Garver's men and a night flight through a dark draw and 5 hours on the territorial road. He was close now, and he knew it, and the knowing was its own kind of pressure. "He'll do it," May said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because Thomas was right about him," she said, "and Thomas was almost never wrong about people." Harold came back in 4 minutes. "Commissioner Aldrich will see you now," he said. "Both of you." Commissioner Aldrich was a tall man with gray hair and the deliberate manner of someone who had learned a long time ago that reacting quickly was less useful than reacting correctly. He shook May's hand first, then Cole's, and he gestured them to chairs across from his desk, and sat down and folded his hands and waited. Cole laid the letter on the desk. He explained it clearly, the timeline, the method, the properties, the clerk, the names. He spoke for 15 minutes without interruption, and the commissioner listened with the specific, focused quality of a man absorbing information he intends to use. When Cole finished, the commissioner picked up the letter. He read it. He read it again. He set it down and looked at Harold Ferris, who had come in behind them and stood by the door. "Get me the county deed records for Laramie County and for Carter's Creek District going back 3 years. Harold was gone before the commissioner finished the sentence. Aldrich looked at May. "You're from Carver's Bluff." "I am." "Is Walter Greer known to you?" "He's been attempting to purchase my property for 2 years at undervalue," May said. "And 3 families in the valley west of Carver's Bluff lost their deeds in the last year under circumstances that match what Mr. Briggs has just described." Aldrich nodded slowly. "Do you have your own deed with you?" May reached into her coat and took out the locked tin box. She opened it with the small key she kept on her person always, and took out Thomas's deed clean, and properly recorded, and signed in Thomas's hand, and hers filed with the county office in the spring of 1877, and laid it on the commissioner's desk beside Garver's letter. Aldrich looked at both documents. "Mrs. Calhoun," he said carefully, "is there any reason to believe your property specifically has been targeted?" The question landed in May's chest with a weight she'd been carrying for 2 years without quite acknowledging. "Yes," she said. "I believe there is." Aldrich looked at Cole. Then he looked back at May. Then he stood and went to the door and spoke to someone in the outer office. May couldn't see low and quick and came back and sat down. "I'm going to need a written statement from both of you," he said, "and I need the county clerk Silas Webb to present himself to this office today. He's at the Aldgate boarding house on the south end of town," Cole said. He came with us. For the first time, something shifted in the commissioner's careful expression. Not surprise exactly, more like a recalibration. He came with you voluntarily. He walked 2 days to find us, Cole said. He left everything he had to get that letter where it needed to go. Aldrich looked at the letter on his desk. All right, he said. Let's begin. They were in that office for 4 hours. May wrote her statement in Harold Ferris's careful hand. He took it down as she spoke, and she spoke clearly and without embellishment the facts in the order they happened, because the facts were more than sufficient on their own. Cole gave his statement to the commissioner directly, and Aldrich asked questions that were precise and pointed and showed he understood exactly what he was dealing with. Silas Webb arrived at 10:30, brought by a territorial officer Harold had sent to the boarding house. Silas looked hollowed out and slightly wild around the eyes, and he sat down across from Commissioner Aldrich and for a moment just looked at the letter on the desk. "That's my handwriting," he said. "Yes?" Aldrich said. "I'd like you to confirm the contents." Silas confirmed them. All of them. He was in that office for 2 hours, and May and Cole waited in the hall on a wooden bench and did not talk for most of it because there was nothing to say that wasn't already in motion. At one point Cole said, "You did that." May looked at him. "Did what?" "The deed, bringing it, knowing Ferris." He shook his head slightly. "I had the letter, and I'd have walked into that office and done my best, but you made it something the commissioner couldn't set aside. Thomas's deed against Garver's letter. Your name and his name together." He looked at his hands. "You made it real, not just a complaint from a mountain cowboy, a pattern, evidence of a pattern." May was quiet for a moment. "Thomas built things that lasted," she said. "You said that yourself." "He did." Cole looked at her. "So do you." May looked at the wall across from them. The plaster was cracked in one corner, and someone had made a half-hearted attempt to paint over it and not quite matched the color. She looked at that imperfect patch of wall and felt something moving in her chest that she couldn't direct anywhere useful, and so she simply sat with it. "What happens now?" she said. "To the commissioner, to Garver." "Aldrich sends a federal marshal to Garver's last known address," Cole said. "The forged deeds get pulled from the record. The affected families, the ones who can be found, get their cases reviewed." He paused. "It won't be fast. It won't fix everything. The Marchettis might not ever get their land back if they've moved on far enough." "But it stops," May said. "It stops," he said. "Yes." She nodded. The door opened, and Harold Ferris came out and told them the commissioner would like to speak to them once more before they left. Aldrich stood when they came in, which was a thing May noticed and marked. "I'm issuing a hold on all deed transactions in Carter's Creek District pending investigation," he said. "That includes any property in or adjacent to Carver's Bluff." He looked at May directly. "Your farm is protected as of this morning, Mrs. Calhoun. Nothing moves against it while this investigation is open." May felt something release in her chest that had been held so long she'd stopped noticing the tension of it. "Thank you," she said. "I should be thanking you," Aldrich said. "Both of you." He looked at Cole. "Mr. Briggs, I'd like to know if you're willing to remain available as this investigation proceeds. We may need your testimony again." Cole glanced at May. It was a brief glance, the kind you don't plan, the kind that goes somewhere before you can redirect it. "I'll be available," he said. "I expect I'll be in the area." May looked at the commissioner's desk. She did not look at Cole, but she heard the words, and she felt them settle in her chest, alongside the release of 2 years of held tension and the specific relief of a morning that had gone exactly the way it needed to go, and she sat with all of it and breathed. They walked out of the commissioner's office at noon into the full heat of a July afternoon, and the street was loud and busy the way Cheyenne always was. And May stood on the steps for a moment, just breathing the outside air. Cole stood beside her. "Hungry," he said. She laughed. It came out before she could stop it. A real laugh, short and surprised, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in long enough that the sound was slightly unfamiliar. "Yes," she said. "I'm very hungry." They found a place 2 streets over that served food without pretension, and they sat across from each other at a small table and ordered everything on the board and ate without ceremony. And it was the best meal May could remember in years. Not because of the food, but because of what was on the other side of it now. It was over the coffee, the second cup, the one you drink when you're not thirsty anymore, but don't want to leave yet, that Cole said, "Garver will know it was me." "Yes," May said. "He'll know the letter went through. He'll know the investigation is open. And he'll know where I was going when his men were on the road." He looked at his cup. "He's a man who holds grudges." "Most men like him do," May said. "Which means there's risk attached to being near me," he said. "For a while. Until the marshals bring him in." He looked up. "I want you to know that, clearly." May looked at him across the table. "Cole," she said. "I stood at my door at 3 in the morning and talked to 3 of his men without flinching. I rode 2 days through backcountry I'd never seen. I walked into the commissioner's office and put Thomas's deed on the desk and stared down a man who could have dismissed me and didn't." She put her coffee cup down. "I am aware of the risk. I assessed it and decided it was worth taking. That was my choice." She held his gaze. "Stop trying to give me a reason to walk away." Cole was very still. "I'm not trying to give you a reason to walk away," he said quietly. "Then what are you doing?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm trying to make sure," he said, "that if you stay knowing exactly what you're staying for." The coffee was cooling between them. The noise of the street came through the window, ordinary and continuous. The sound of a city going about its business with no knowledge of any particular conversation happening at any particular table. May looked at Cole Briggs, at this man who had come through her gate bleeding and half-starved, and had said thank you and meant it and left a silver dollar and come back and then come back again. Who had told her about his brother, with the same voice he used for everything, direct, without decoration, trusting her to receive it. Who had turned back from the Henderson Spring because he couldn't ride away and leave her facing what was coming alone. She understood, looking at him, that she had been making decisions about this man since the moment she refilled his bowl without asking. That the decisions had been accumulating quietly, the way water accumulates in dry ground after a long drought, not flooding, not dramatic, just steadily filling in all the spaces that had been empty. "I know what I'm staying for," she said. Something in his face changed. Not dramatically. Cole Briggs didn't do things dramatically. It was more like the careful way he held himself, the controlled quality that was always there, released just slightly. Like a knot that doesn't come undone all at once but loses one loop. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They walked back to the boarding house in the afternoon heat side by side, not touching, not talking, which was its own kind of intimacy by now. Silas Webb was sitting in the small parlor when they came in, and he looked like a different man than the one who'd arrived, not recovered, not healed, but lighter in some way. Like something he'd been carrying for 2 years had been taken out of his hands and placed somewhere official, and he hadn't quite figured out what to do with the space where it used to be. "What did they say?" Cole asked. "The commissioner's man told me I'm a material witness," Silas said. "I have to stay in Cheyenne until the investigation reaches the hearing stage." He looked at his hands. "They're bringing in a federal marshal. Could be a week, could be 3. He looked up. "They're going to find the Marchetti family. The commissioner's office is putting out inquiries." May sat down across from him. "Your wife," she said. "She's in Laramie." "Yes." His voice went soft on it. "Send her a letter today," May said. "Tell her where you are, and that you're safe, and that it's going to be all right." She looked at him steadily. "Is it going to be all right for her?" He thought about that, honestly. "I lost my position. I don't know what we do after this." "You start somewhere else," May said. "You start knowing you did the right thing in the end, which is more than most men can say." She paused. "That's not nothing, Silas." He looked at her for a moment. How do you do that? He said. Just say the true thing like it's simple. It is simple, May said. Most true things are. People just make them complicated because complicated feels safer. Cole was in the doorway, and she was aware of him there without looking, the way she'd become aware of him everywhere without meaning to. They stayed in Cheyenne one more day. The commissioner's office required a second round of written statements from both May and Cole, more specific, more detailed. And Harold Ferris took them down with the same precise care he'd always had, and told May at the end of it that Thomas would be pleased, which was the truest and most useful thing anyone said to her in Cheyenne. The morning they left, Silas came to the boarding house door to see them off. He shook Cole's hand. He turned to May and opened his mouth, and she could see again that he was going to say something that would take too long. "Write to your wife," she said. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." They rode north out of Cheyenne in the morning light, and the road back was different from the road down. No urgency, no flight, no listening behind them for hoofbeats. Just the two of them and the open country, and the horses finding an easy pace that covered ground without working at it. They didn't take the back route home. They took the main road, because there was no reason not to. The investigation was open. The deed hold was in place. Whatever Garver planned to do next, he was going to do it against a wall that hadn't existed 3 days ago, and he was smart enough to know it. Cole rode easy beside her, and May rode easy beside Cole, and somewhere around mid-morning, with the mountains to the west getting bigger as they went north, and the summer land going by around them, she said, "What was the mountain like?" "Your ranch." He looked at her. "Up in the Laramie Range." Yes, he thought about it honestly. "High," he said. "Higher than most people want to go. Cold for 8 months. In the summer, it's the most beautiful place I've ever been." He paused. "But it's very quiet. Too quiet." "I thought that was what I wanted," he said. "And now," he looked at the road ahead. "Now I think I was using the quiet to not have to answer questions I wasn't ready for." "What questions?" "Same ones everyone avoids." He glanced at her. "Whether I was living the life I was living because it was right for me, or because it was easier than something else." May rode for a moment without answering. "And," she said. "It was easier," he said. "The mountains are beautiful, and they were easier." He said it plainly without self-pity. "Being alone is easier, until it isn't." "Until someone asks if you've eaten," May said. He looked at her. Something in his face did that thing again, the knot loosening another loop. "Yes," he said. "Until that." They made camp one night on the road north, not in the back country, but off the main road in a stand of trees, where there was water and room for the horses, and they made a fire and ate what was left of the food May had packed, and sat across from each other in the firelight, the way they'd sat in her kitchen so many times in the space of one strange week that it felt like a habit already. "Your farm," Cole said, "when we get back." "Yes." "The investigation is going to take weeks, maybe longer." He looked at the fire. "Greer's going to know the deed hold is in place. He's going to know his connection to Garver is at risk of becoming public." "He's going to be frightened," May said. "Men like Greer get very loud when they're frightened." "He might try something before the marshals come," Cole said. "Something he thinks he can still get away with." May looked at the fire. She thought about her farm, about the bean rows and the chickens and the gate with the stuck latch she'd fixed just last week, about the lamp in the window. "Ruth Tanner's there," she said. "She's more capable than any man Greer would send." "Ruth Tanner won't be there indefinitely." "No." May looked at him across the fire. "Are you saying you want to stay?" The fire crackled. Cole looked at her directly. "I'm saying," he said carefully, "that I have no particular reason to go back to the mountains right now. The horses need a real rest. The investigation may need me in the area." He held her gaze. "And your fence on the south end needs work. I saw it when we left." May looked at him. "You saw my fence," she said. "It needs 2 new posts, and the wires come loose in at least 3 places." And you want to fix my fence. Among other things, he said. The fire between them was low now, mostly coals, and the night was very quiet. In the way the open country was quiet with a depth to it that city quiet never had. May looked at the coals. She thought about the chair at her kitchen table that had started to feel like his. About the $2 silver in her apron pocket, the second one scratched with her initial, the one he'd left when he thought he was leaving for good. About the way she'd made stew for 2 out of habit for 3 years, and the first night she actually used both bowls. She thought about Thomas saying water always finds its way. She looked up at Cole. The barn's got a clean stall, she said. You know where the hay is. He looked at her. For now, she said. Until we figure out what comes next. Until we figure out what comes next, he said. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise with ribbons on it. It was a man and a woman who had both survived hard things sitting across a fire and agreeing to stop running in opposite directions, which was not romantic by any conventional measure and was the most honest thing May Calhoun had felt since Thomas died. She banked the fire. She rolled her blanket out and lay back and looked at the sky. The same sky she'd looked at 2 nights ago with the stars huge overhead. Except now, she wasn't trying not to lean into anything. Now, she was just looking at the stars. Beside her, not close the appropriate distance of 2 people who were being careful, Cole lay on his back with his hat over his face, and his breathing slowed and steadied, and May listened to it until her own did the same. In the morning they rode north, toward home. Both of them. They came back into Carver's Bluff on a Thursday morning, and the town noticed. May had not expected otherwise. 2 people riding in together after 3 days gone was the kind of thing a small town absorbed and catalogued and discussed before the horses were even unsaddled. She held her head straight and rode at a steady pace down the main street and did not look at anyone in particular, which was the same thing she'd been doing for 3 years, and she was very good at it. Cole rode beside her and said nothing, which was also exactly right. Ruth Tanner was on the porch when they came up the road to the farm, sitting in the chair Thomas used to sit in with a cup of coffee and a rifle across her knees, which was Ruth's version of a warm welcome. She was 60 years old and broad-shouldered, and had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have decided they are not afraid of anything and have had enough years to make that decision stick. She looked at May. She looked at Cole. She looked at the horses. Farms in one piece, she said. Greer sent a man out yesterday. Said he wanted to talk to you about the property line on the east field. What did you tell him? May said. I told him you weren't home, and when you got back, you'd be too busy to see him. Ruth looked at Cole with calm, direct assessment. Who's this Cole Briggs? May said. He's going to be helping with the fence on the south end. Ruth looked at the south fence, which was not visible from the porch, and then looked back at Cole, with the expression of a woman who understood completely that the fence was not the point. Coffee's on the stove, she said. They went inside. Ruth packed up her things and May paid her. And Ruth hugged May once briefly, the way Ruth did everything direct and without ceremony, and then she was gone, and the farm was just May's again, which it had been for 3 years, except that Cole was in the barn, seeing to the horses, and his saddle was on her barn rail, and his hat was on her porch post, and none of those things felt wrong, the way she'd expected they might. She stood in her kitchen and put the coffee on and looked at the table. 2 cups. She set out 2 cups without thinking about it, and this time she didn't stop and look at the second one with the complicated grief of a woman who'd done it by mistake. This time she set it out, and it was for someone, and that someone was 30 feet away in her barn and would come in when the horses were settled. She sat down and drank her coffee and waited. He came in when the horses were settled. He sat down and drank the coffee she'd poured, and they talked about what needed doing on the farm. The fence first, then the roof on the chicken coop that had been soft in one corner since spring, then the kitchen garden that had gotten ahead of itself while she was gone. Practical things. Real things. The kind of conversation that was also underneath a different conversation about how 2 people might organize a shared life without either of them having to say that word out loud yet. The fence took 2 days. Cole worked from sunup until the light failed, and May worked beside him, handing posts and pulling wire, and doing the work she knew how to do. And by the end of the second day, the south fence was the best it had been since Thomas built it, and Cole stood back and looked at it with his hands on his hips and said, "That'll hold." "It will," May said. He looked at her. "What's next?" "Chicken coop roof," she said. "Right," he said, and picked up his tools. That was how it went. Walter Greer came on the fourth day. May was in the kitchen garden when she heard his horse on the road, and she knew it was him. The same way she always knew a particular dread that had become as familiar as weather over 2 years. The kind of dread that makes your jaw tight without your permission. She stood up and did not brush the dirt off her hands. Greer came through the gate in his good coat, with his silver watch chain catching the morning light, and his indulgent smile already in place. He had a man with him riding just behind, not one of the three from the night road, a different one younger, with the soft look of someone hired for presence rather than competence. May watched them come across the yard. Cole came around the corner of the barn. He'd heard the horses too. He stopped and stood with his arms at his sides and said nothing. Just watched, and his watching had a quality to it that made the young man behind Greer's horse shift in his saddle. Greer looked at Cole. Something moved in his eyes, not quite recognition, but close. He'd been looking for Cole for a week. He knew the gray horse. He knew the description. He looked back at May, and the smile didn't change, but the quality behind it did. "May," he said, "glad you're back. I heard you'd been traveling." "I had some business to attend to," May said. "Walter." "Business." He turned the word over like he was examining it. "Funny thing, I heard the commissioner's office in Cheyenne put a hold on deed transactions in this district." He kept his voice easy. "You know anything about that?" "I know what a deed hold is," May said. "Seems like someone went to a lot of trouble to make things complicated for good businessmen in this county." He glanced at Cole again. "I don't believe I know your friend." "Cole Briggs," Cole said. He didn't move forward, didn't tip his hat, just said his name and let it sit there. Greer looked at him for a long moment. May could see him calculating what he knew, what he suspected, what he could prove, what he couldn't. The calculation was happening right there on his face, and he was good enough to keep most of it off, but not good enough to keep all of it off. And May had been reading Walter Greer for 2 years, and she could see the edges. "Mr. Briggs," Greer said, "you're a long way from the Laramie Range." Cole said nothing. "I ask because I have business interests up that way," Greer said pleasantly. "I know some of the ranchers. I may have heard your name." "That's possible," Cole said. The pleasant quality in Greer's voice went very slightly thin. "I'd like to speak to May alone if you don't mind." "I do mind," Cole said. The young man behind Greer shifted again. Greer looked at Cole with the smile holding and something behind it that was no longer even pretending to be friendly. "May," he said, "I'll get to it plainly. I've made you a fair offer on this property twice. I'm prepared to make a third offer more generous than the previous 2. Deed holds don't last forever. Investigations come and go. In the end, a woman alone." "I'm not alone," May said. Greer stopped. May looked at him steadily. "I haven't been alone since before you sent men to my road at 3 in the morning, Walter. And I'm considerably less alone today than I was then." She held his gaze. "I'm not selling this property. Not to you, not to anyone. The deed is filed and protected, and the commissioner's office has a copy of it now, alongside some other documents you're going to be reading about in the coming weeks." She stepped forward 1 step. "I'd like you to leave my property." Greer looked at her. The smile was entirely gone now. What was underneath it was not anger, something more controlled, than anger more dangerous, the expression of a man rearranging his plans rather than losing his temper. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "I've made mistakes before," May said. "This isn't one of them." Greer looked at Cole 1 more time. Cole looked back. Nothing passed between them that could be quoted or recorded or brought before a court. But something passed the way things pass between men who understand each other's capacity without needing to demonstrate it. And Greer pulled his horse around and rode out of the gate with his hired presence following behind him, and the gate was still swinging when Cole came to stand beside May in the yard. She let out a breath. "He'll be back," Cole said. "Not for long," May said. "The marshals are coming." "How long?" Commissioner Aldrich said 2 weeks at most. She looked at the gate, settling on its hinge. 2 weeks is nothing. I've waited 3 years. Cole looked at her profile. "You didn't flinch," he said. "I wasn't going to flinch in front of Walter Greer," she said. "I've been not flinching in front of Walter Greer since Thomas died. I'm very practiced at it." "I know," he said. "That's not what I meant." She looked at him. "I meant you weren't alone this time," he said. "And you still did it yourself. You didn't step back and let me handle it." May looked at him steadily. "Was I supposed to?" "No," he said. And the way he said it, simple and certain, made something settle in May's chest. "That's exactly what I meant." The 2 weeks were not quiet. Greer's lawyer filed a counter-inquiry with the county office challenging the deed hold, which was his right, and which Commissioner Aldrich's office answered in 4 business days with a document that was by Harold Ferris's account, when he wrote to May, extremely thorough and not particularly sympathetic to Greer's position. 2 of the men from the night road came through Carver's Bluff and went to the saloon and asked questions that were too specific to be casual. Cole heard about it from Ed Harlan, who heard about it from the barman who heard about it, because small towns hear everything. Cole told May that evening at the kitchen table, and May thought about it for 30 seconds, and then went to write a letter to Commissioner Aldrich describing the men and their questions and their timing, because that was evidence, and evidence needed to be documented, and she was very good at documentation now. She gave Cole the letter to read before she sealed it. He read it and handed it back and said, "You didn't mention that I was the one who heard it from Ed." "Your name is already in enough documents," she said. "Mine needs to be in more." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because when this comes before a hearing, I want it on record that it wasn't just a mountain cowboy carrying a letter," she said. "I want it on record that a widow woman in Carver's Bluff saw what was happening to her county and did something about it." She met his eyes. "Women like me disappear from records. I'm not disappearing from this one." Cole held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "No, you're not." She sealed the letter and sent it the next morning. The marshals arrived on a Tuesday, 11 days after May and Cole returned from Cheyenne, which was 3 days ahead of the commissioner's estimate. There were 2 of them, a federal marshal named Doyle, who was quiet and methodical, and had the specific unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this many times, and a younger deputy whose name May didn't catch because he said it once, and she was already thinking about what Doyle's arrival meant. They went to the county office first. Then they went to the bank, where Greer kept his business records. Then, by Thursday afternoon, they went to Walter Greer's house on the north end of town with a paper that meant something specific and final. May heard about it from Ruth Tanner, who lived 3 houses from the main street, and who had the best situational awareness of anyone in Carver's Bluff, and was not shy about using it. Ruth came out to the farm on Thursday evening and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "They took him." May set her coffee cup down. "Walter Greer," Ruth said. "Marshal Doyle walked him out of his own house at 4 o'clock this afternoon, in front of half the town." Ruth looked at May with an expression that was not quite triumph, but was the thing that lives right next to it in people who have been patient a very long time. He didn't look so pleased with himself. May was quiet for a moment. Cole was at the table, and he didn't say anything either, and the 3 of them stood in the kitchen in the particular silence of people absorbing the end of something they'd been braced against for so long that the absence of it had its own weight. "The Pearson family," May said finally. "Did anyone—" "Commissioner's office sent word to the Pearsons last week," Cole said. "Ed told me. They're in Colorado now. Whether they come back for the hearing—" He paused. "That's their choice to make." "The Marchettis," May said. "Still looking," Cole said. "Aldrich has men on it." May nodded. She looked at the kitchen table, at the 2 cups, at the lamp burning in the window the way it always burned, the way she'd been burning it since Thomas died every night without exception. "Is it over?" Ruth said. "The part we could do," May said. "Yes." Ruth left after another cup of coffee, and May and Cole sat at the table in the quiet that was left behind. It was a different quiet than the one May had lived in for 3 years. Not the quiet of a house with one person in it. Something else. Something with a different texture. "I need to tell you something," Cole said. May looked at him. He had both hands around his cup, and he was looking at it, which was how she'd come to know he was going to say something that mattered to him. He looked at his hands when things mattered. "I'm not going back to the mountains," he said. May was very still. "Not permanently," he said. "I need to go up once. Close down the cabin properly. Bring the horses down that are still up there. I can't just leave it." He looked up. "But I'm not going back to stay." "What changed?" she said, though she suspected she knew. "You asked me that on the road," he said. "What changed?" And I said until it isn't meaning until being alone stopped being enough. He held her gaze. "It stopped being enough before I came through your gate. I just didn't have anywhere to go instead." He was quiet for a moment. "Now I do. If that's—" He stopped. Tried again. "If you want that." May looked at him across the table. She thought about the second cup. About the barn with the clean stall. About his hat on her porch post that she had not moved once in 11 days. About the south fence that would hold through 10 winters. About the way he'd stood in her yard when Greer came and said nothing, and it was exactly the right nothing. She thought about Thomas and what Thomas would say, and she knew exactly what Thomas would say, because Thomas had said it once about something else entirely about the farm, about a hard season, about whether to plant again after a bad year. He'd said, "Water always finds its way, May. You just have to stop blocking the channel." She had been blocking a lot of channels for 3 years. She understood that now. She looked at Cole. "I want that," she said. He let out a breath. It was the only time she'd ever seen him look uncertain, and then not uncertain, the before and after visible in a single exhale, and it made him look younger and more real than anything else she'd seen from him. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They sat there for another minute, just being in the same room with what had been said, which needed a minute, because some things need to breathe before you move them. Then May said, "The cabin in the mountains. How long to close it properly?" "A week," he said. "Maybe 10 days if the weather turns." "Then go," she said. "Go and come back." He looked at her. "You're not worried I won't," he said. "No," she said simply. He looked at her for a long moment. "Why not?" "Because you came back from the Henderson Spring," she said. "You could have kept riding. You turned back." She held his gaze. "Men who turn back once turn back again. That's who they are." Cole looked at her with the expression she had never fully learned to look at, straight on, the one that was too much and too honest and aimed entirely at her. "I'll be back in 10 days, he said. "I'll have the stall ready," she said. He left the next morning before first light, the same way he'd first left. Except this time, May was awake and standing at the kitchen window with her coffee, and she watched him saddle the gray in the dark of the barn, the lamp throwing long shadows. And she did not feel the specific hollow grief of watching someone go that she had felt for 3 years every time she thought of Thomas leaving for survey work and never coming home. She felt something different. She felt the 10 days as a shape with an end to it. He lifted his hand as he rode out the gate. She raised her cup. The gate swung behind him. She went to make breakfast. The 10 days were not empty. The investigation sent a letter requiring a further written statement from May about Greer's conduct on the property, which she wrote and sent within the day. Ed Harlan came by twice, once to check on things, and once with news that the Pearson family had written to the commissioner's office from Colorado, and were considering returning for the hearing, which made May put her hand on the kitchen counter for a moment, and just stand there feeling the weight of that. Ruth came on the 5th day with a pie and information which was Ruth's standard combination. "People are talking," Ruth said, sitting at May's table. "About you, about Briggs." "I expect they are," May said. "Some of them aren't being kind about it," Ruth said. She said it plainly without apology, because that was Ruth. "Some of them were never kind about it," May said. "Thomas dying didn't make them kind. Me surviving didn't make them kind. I'm not going to rearrange my life hoping they become kind." Ruth looked at her. "You're happy," she said. Not a question, almost surprised. May thought about it honestly. "I think so," she said. "I think I am." She looked at the table. "It's been long enough that I almost didn't recognize it." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good," in the voice of a woman who meant it completely. On the 8th day, a letter came from Commissioner Aldrich's office. May opened it at the kitchen table and read it straight through without stopping. The county clerk in the Carters Creek district, a different man from Silas Webb, the clerk on the Laramie side, had come forward voluntarily. Another witness, another set of records. The case against Garver and Greer was in Aldrich's carefully official language, proceeding with considerable evidential support. And at the bottom, in Harold Ferris's small, precise handwriting, a personal note: "Thomas would be proud, Mrs. Calhoun. I thought you should know that from someone who knew him." May folded the letter. She held it in both hands for a long moment. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in a very long time, and she wasn't going to start now. But something in her chest opened that had been closed for 3 years. A room she'd locked because she couldn't afford what was in it while she was surviving. And she let it open, and she sat with what was in it, and she let that be all right. Thomas would be proud. She was proud too. She put the letter in the tin box with the deed and locked it and put it back under the floorboard, and she went out to the kitchen garden and worked until supper time. Cole came back on the 10th day. It was late afternoon, and May was at the market table. She hadn't missed a Tuesday market yet, not through any of it, because the tomatoes didn't care about land fraud, and the chickens didn't care about federal investigations, and the work continued the way the work always continued when she saw the gray horse coming down the main street. She finished the transaction she was in the middle of. She gave the correct change to Mrs. Albright, who was buying squash, and who also happened to be watching the gray horse approach and trying to appear as though she wasn't. Cole stopped at the edge of the market square. He looked at May from the back of the gray horse, dusty from the road, 10 days of mountain country on him. And she looked back from behind her market table with a customer's coin still in her hand. The market went on around them. It did not stop for them. It went on the way life went on, ordinary and continuous. The business of a small town doing what small towns did. And inside all of that ordinariness, May Calhoun smiled at Cole Briggs. Not a polite smile, not a careful smile, a real one. The kind that had been in short supply for 3 years, the kind that started in her chest and moved outward without asking permission. He tipped his hat. One of the women near May said something to another woman in a low voice, and May didn't hear what it was and didn't care. She sold out her tomatoes in the next 20 minutes because she was efficient, and she'd been selling tomatoes for 3 years, and she knew how to move product. And when the last customer walked away, she packed her table and loaded the wagon and drove home. Cole was there before her. The gray was in the barn. The barn door was open. She could hear him moving in there, settling the horse, drawing water, the familiar sounds of someone who knew where everything was. She unhitched the mare and walked her to the trough. Cole came out of the barn. They stood in the yard in the late afternoon light and looked at each other. "How is the cabin?" she said. "Cold," he said. "Beautiful. Empty in the way mountains get empty when you realize you've been using them wrong." "What did you bring back?" He went to the gray and reached into the saddlebag and came back with something that he held out to her. It was a flat piece of stone, smooth and dark palm-sized, with a natural stripe of white quartz running through the middle of it. The kind of thing you pick up off a mountain trail because it catches your eye and you can't leave it. "From the high ridge," he said, "where you can see 4 counties on a clear day." May took it, held it. "It's heavy," she said. "It's real," he said. She turned it in her hands. The quartz stripe caught the light. She thought about a high ridge she'd never been to, and a man who'd lived there alone for 6 years and picked up a rock to bring back because there wasn't anything else up there that belonged in a kitchen. She looked at him. "Come inside," she said. "Supper's not started yet. You can help." He came inside. He helped. He was not a skilled cook, he said as much apologetically when he managed to oversalt the potatoes, and May stood at the stove and said, "Thomas couldn't cook either. I think it must be a quality in men worth keeping." Cole laughed. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh, and it was low and genuine, and slightly surprised, the laugh of a man who hadn't expected to, and May stirred the pot and did not look at him because she was smiling too much and she had her limits. They ate supper and washed the dishes and sat at the table with the lamp between them and the summer evening coming in through the window and the farm quiet around them. And at some point the conversation slowed and then stopped, and they just sat in the quiet together, which was entirely different from sitting in the quiet alone. May looked at the lamp. "I light it every night," she said. "I've lit it every night since Thomas died." Cole looked at the lamp. "I know," he said. "It started as I don't know exactly what it started as," she said. "Something to do, something to mark the night, something that felt like not giving up on the light." She looked at it. "I didn't know if I'd ever be able to stop." Cole was quiet. Then he said, "You don't have to stop." She looked at him. "Light it," he said simply. "I'll be here." May looked at him for a long moment. This man at her table, this mountain cowboy who had come through her gate bleeding and half-starved and had turned back when he could have kept going twice, and had stood in her yard and fixed her fence and sat across from a federal commissioner and ridden 10 days to a mountain and back and come back with a rock from the high ridge because it was real. She reached forward and picked up the lamp. She carried it to the window. She set it in the sill where it had sat every night for 3 years, and it burned there the way it always burned, steady and clear, the same light in the same window. Except this time, when she turned around, someone was there. Someone was at her table with his hands around a coffee cup and his hat on the porch post, and the kitchen was warm, and the supper things were put away, and the farm was quiet and whole around them. Cole looked at her from across the room. "Come sit down, May," he said. She came and sat down. And the lamp burned in the window all night long, the same as always, except now it wasn't burning for the memory of someone gone. It was burning because 2 people were home, and they both knew it, and neither of them was leaving, and that was the end and the beginning, and everything in between, all at once, solid as fence posts, in good ground, steady as a spring in the rocks that gives water even in July, real as a stone from the high ridge sitting on a kitchen table with the light falling on it. The white quartz stripe glowing like something that had always been waiting to be found. May Calhoun had kept the lamp burning for 3 years. She never had to wonder why again.